A man sits in his apartment high above the city. The walls are polished, the shelves full, the floor spotless. In this episode, we step into a question that has echoed since the time of Rome. What makes a good life? We are not here to chase quick answers or shiny goals. We are here to sit with the uncomfortable, to notice the overlooked, and to ask gently, honestly, whether a good life might need less than we think. It teaches us to examine what we chase, to pause before we react, and to ask, again and again, is this necessary? That without clarity, we will collect not only possessions, but habits, beliefs, and fears that do not belong to us. And that the most courageous life is not one that wins the world, but one that knows what it can live without. The Stoics believed that happiness is not found in external success, but in internal alignment. He reminded himself to expect insult, to embrace discomfort, to keep his temper, saying no to that extra scroll, that extra hour, that extra thing we do not need, not because simplicity is fashionable, but because it is freeing. Each thing we remove, each obligation, each object, each expectation makes room for what is essential, what is real, what remains when the noise fades. Not to impress others, but to stay close to what matters. It is about noticing the warmth of sunlight on the floor, rather than buying another lamp. We will travel through history, into the lives of those who practice this way. We will explore other cultures and spiritual traditions that echo this same insight. And we will examine what it might look like to practice simplicity today in cities, in careers, in relationships. But for now, let us return to where we began. One man, surrounded by everything, yet quietly lost. Another, with very little, but anchored in peace. Their difference is not in wealth, but in clarity. In knowing what is enough, the breath, the breeze, the quiet joy of a task well done, the pleasure of doing one thing at a time. These moments are small, but they are where life happens. They do not shout, they whisper, and we must be quiet enough to hear them. It is about savoring a meal slowly, rather than chasing the next exotic flavor. It is about depth, not distance, presence, not performance. We are surrounded by opportunities to compare ourselves, to measure our days by productivity, and to let our self-worth ride the unpredictable waves of social validation. Not fear of missing out, but joy in being here, now. We are not called to renounce life, but to enter it more deeply, with fewer distractions, and greater attention. And yet, beneath it all, we hunger for stillness. Each day, a chance to choose what we keep and what we let go. Not just the objects in our homes, but the thoughts in our minds. It echoes through ancient temples, whispered by monks in Himalayan caves, written into the chants of Vedic seers, and the quiet smiles of Laozi's ink characters. It is not owned by Stoicism, but it is lived there with striking clarity. And when we pause, when we listen, when we let the noise fall away, we feel it, that gentle, grounding truth. The beliefs we carry, the assumptions we follow, the practices we inherit without question. The Stoics would have us ask, not once, but constantly, is this helping me live with virtue, with wisdom, with peace, for quiet, for depth? The Stoics teach that the path back is not found through addition, but through awareness. He knew that outer power means little if one is a slave to desire. Epictetus, born into slavery, taught that freedom begins in the mind, that no matter how little one owns, one can still possess peace. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, he wrote, but in having few wants, to live with virtue, to live with reason, and to live with enough, perhaps much less. Around him hum the quiet sounds of modern comfort air conditioning, the low buzz of notifications from a phone he hasn't touched in hours. Realize this, and you will find strength. His words, written 2,000 years ago in the heat of war and political intrigue, seem uncannily suited for today. His writings are filled with this tension between having much and needing little. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." These words, like quiet ripples, move through the centuries and reach us now, still valid, perhaps even more urgent in our time. We live in a world where the external has never been more overwhelming. We are flooded with choices, images, updates, and opinions. Our minds are filled before we wake up, before we even look away from the screen. And still, we are told to want more, to do more, to be more. He has everything, a job that pays well, shelves of books he swears he'll read, a streaming library full of stories he never finishes. We begin to wonder, though not always aloud, what if the answer isn't more at all? What if peace lives not in adding, but in subtracting? What if strength begins not with control over the world, but over ourselves? And yet, his eyes are heavy with a kind of still restlessness, as if surrounded by abundance, but hollowed by something unnamed. Not far away, another man wakes in a smaller home. Sunlight spills onto a bare wooden floor. There is a kettle on the stove, a cushion by the window, and little else. He sips tea slowly. There are no notifications, no clutter. Just light, warmth, and stillness. The question arises quietly, why is it that one who has more can feel so empty, and the one who has less can radiate such calm? Welcome to Stoic Dhamma, a space where we explore the quiet power of ancient wisdom, told gently, with reflection, and never in haste. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher and emperor, once wrote, "You have power over your mind not outside events, but something in us quietly resists, something deep and patient inside us senses the fatigue beneath the speed, the quiet ache beneath the convenience." This is where Stoicism begins. It does not ask us to renounce the world, but to re-enter it wisely. They knew something we often forget, that the world will always offer us more than we need. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but in the early hours of morning, he wrote quietly to himself about stillness and humility. Seneca, the wealthy advisor to emperors, spent his life urging others to examine their attachments. Today, we face a different kind of excess, not just of objects, but of information, noise, and stimulation. To live a good life in our age might mean turning down the volume, declining the invitation to always be available. This is not about austerity, not about abandoning beauty or comfort. It is about choosing them with care. When we remove what is not essential, we begin to see more clearly what is, and so, we begin again. This is intentional simplicity, not absence, but presence, not lack, but clarity. A good life needs very little. This idea is not new. In the chapters ahead, we will walk further into this philosophy. It is easy to believe that simplicity is a modern invention, a response to modern problems, a kind of minimalism born from cluttered closets and overstimulated minds. But the idea that a good life requires very little is not new. He wrote his meditations not from palaces, but from tents. Surrounded by suffering, burdened by responsibility, he still found it necessary to pause and reflect. An advisor to the Emperor Nero, his life was filled with contradiction. That peace comes not from adding more, but from needing less. It is a lesson that transcends Stoicism and echoes across the spiritual landscapes of the world. He enjoyed the comforts of Roman nobility but never ceased warning others of their dangers. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor, he wrote. Seneca understood firsthand the seductive power of excess. His letters, written in moments of quiet between political storms, speak of restraint, discipline. They point us inward. They ask us to examine our attachments, to question what we truly need, and in doing so, they invite us into a life that is rich not in possessions, but in presence, not in ambition, but in awareness. They said, if it comes, use it well. If it leaves, let it go. What matters is not the shape of your fortune, but the shape of your soul. It is to carry only what helps you walk with dignity, with focus, with peace. It is to know that life, at its core, is not complicated. It is simple and beautiful and enough. What matters is not how much you have, but how much you need. And a longing for philosophical purity that is public life rarely allowed. He reminds us that life is not measured by the number of experiences, but by the depth of our experience. He asks us not to do more, but to be more present in what we do, to love what we already have, to cherish the ordinary. It has been walked by kings and monks, by slaves and sages. It is walked not in the mountains or monasteries alone, but in the city, in the office, in the home. It is walked in silence, in thought, in gentle decisions made every day. His journal reveals no longing for more land or glory, but instead a deep commitment to self-mastery. He returned again and again to one idea, that virtue, clarity, and control of one's thoughts were worth more than any outward achievement. The outer world, with all its temptations and distractions, is seen as a veil that obscures the soul's true nature. Of the subtle art of letting go, the Buddha, born into wealth, abandoned his palace not out of despair, but out of clarity. He saw that suffering arises not from lack, but from clinging. And so he taught the practice of release, of mindfulness, of sitting with what is. He did not ask his followers to become poor. He asked them to become free from craving, from illusion, from the need to control what cannot be controlled. The sages who wrote the Upanishads spoke not of acquiring knowledge, but of unlearning falsehoods. In their silence, in their stillness beneath the trees, they sought what could not be bought or grasped truth that reveals itself when the mind is quiet. It was not coined in a blog post or summarized in a podcast. It was lived in silence, in hardship, and in the presence of immense noise by some of the most powerful and most humble figures in ancient history. The sage does not accumulate knowledge or possessions. He lets them fall away. In the words of Lao Tzu, to attain knowledge, add things every day. To attain wisdom, remove things every day. The message is not to retreat from life, but to live it without burden, without resistance, without needing it to be more than it already is. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, might have been expected to indulge in every luxury available to him. He had legions at his command, the empire's wealth at his fingertips, and the admiration of nearly every citizen who passed beneath his statues. But Marcus chose another path. In his private writings, never meant for publication, he reminded himself again and again to return to stillness. Very little, he wrote, is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. These were not just musings, they were personal reminders carved out of chaos for much of his reign. Marcus was at war. Not metaphorical battles, but long, bitter campaigns along the empire's northern frontiers. He was not alone. Epictetus, born into slavery, lived with far less. His early life was shaped by limitation. He owned nothing, commanded no armies, held no title. And yet, he taught freely about the freedom that lives in the mind. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, he said, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. His teachings, shared not through books, but in conversations with students, were eventually recorded, and they resonate today with a quiet authority. You can be free, even when you own nothing, if your thoughts are your own. Seneca, perhaps the most paradoxical of the three, lived in wealth but taught detachment. These three men, though separated by class, circumstance, and personality, held a common belief that enough is not found outside, but inside. In the teachings of Hinduism, the pursuit of moksha, or liberation, begins with the shedding of illusion. Buddhism, too, speaks gently of the middle path. In Taoism, simplicity is not a practice but a return. The Tao, or way, flows effortlessly, like water. It does not push, it does not strive. What these traditions share with Stoicism is not dogma, but direction. Returning to Marcus Aurelius, we find a man who had every reason to be distracted, but who chose instead to focus. The Stoics never said the world is bad, they never said wealth is wrong. And so, we see that the path of simplicity is not new. It is ancient. To need very little is not to lack. It is to see clearly. In the rush of daily life, it's easy to forget what we are even rushing toward. A glance at the clock, a tap on the screen, a message, a meeting, a moment lost in transition. But in the process of gaining convenience, we have lost something else, something quieter. The space to reflect, the ability to focus, the courage to do less. It may seem small, even outdated, but the act of writing down our thoughts is a powerful tool. But the Stoics knew that comfort can become a cage. One simple act of resistance is to reduce, not eliminate, but reduce digital noise. To unfollow voices that do not nourish us, to disable notifications that scatter our focus. A walk without headphones, a meal without a screen, a conversation with full presence. These are not luxuries, they are foundations. They ground us in the moment, they train us to see what we often overlook: the warmth of the sun, the rhythm of breath, the quiet presence of another human being. These are the ingredients of a life that is not impressive, but deeply felt. A single page of reflection, a walk through trees, a phone call with someone we love. These are not achievements, they are moments. But life, as the Stoics remind us, is not a race between events. It is built not by denying pleasure, but by refusing slavery to it. It honors joy, but only the kind that does not vanish when things change. It seeks meaning, not noise. It teaches that enough is not a number, it is a mindset. It is a weaving of presence, choice, and virtue. To reclaim moments of boredom as opportunities for reflection, not entertainment. Before we buy, do I need this, or am I avoiding something? Before we scroll, am I feeding curiosity or distracting myself from discomfort? Before we commit, is this aligned with the kind of life I want to live? In choosing what we let in, we shape the terrain of our inner world. When we fear discomfort, we become fragile. When we embrace it, even in small ways, we grow stronger, freer. This does not mean we must suffer. The map grows more detailed, but the compass is easily lost. Simplicity, then, becomes a guide, that we do not need to do more to be worthy. That presence, simplicity, and inner peace are not rewards. They are available here, now, in the space we create when we finally pause. Not a rule, but a rhythm, not an endpoint, but a practice. We may never have perfect clarity, but we can choose clarity more often. We may not silence the world, but we can quiet our corner of it. Neuroscience tells us that our brains, flooded with dopamine from constant novelty, begin to crave it. What once gave joy becomes normal. What is normal becomes dull. Not out of scarcity, but out of clarity. A woman in the city decides to give up her corporate apartment to move into a smaller space closer to nature. She grows her food, slows her pace, and discovers that freedom lies not in owning everything, but in needing little. A man, once celebrated in boardrooms, steps away from quarterly goals and social metrics. He finds a quiet retreat, and in the stillness, remembers what it feels like to breathe deeply again. And so, we reach for more and more tabs, more updates, more clicks while attention, patience, and contentment quietly erode. To values once buried beneath ambition, to selves long forgotten in the pursuit of success. The Stoic life, when lived today, does not ask us to renounce the world. It asks us to realign with what matters. The Stoics did not have smartphones, but they understood this dynamic. Seneca warned of being everywhere but nowhere, scattered in mind by the distractions of the crowd. It means occasionally turning down the temperature, walking instead of driving, delaying a meal to feel gratitude for it. These are gentle reminders that we are not our cravings, we are capable of more than we believe. Marcus Aurelius did not write to be read. He wrote to remember, to reflect, to stay grounded in his values amid the chaos of empire. Today, journaling remains a way to reclaim our minds. A few minutes each morning or night to ask, what truly matters today? What did I chase that I did not need? What did I notice that made me feel alive? We find ourselves caught in what some psychologists now call the attention economy. Every moment of silence becomes a space for someone else's message. Every glance becomes an opportunity to consume. It is not just our time that is being spent, it is our inner clarity. The hours pile up with invisible weight. And behind every hurried step is the quiet whisper that we are running out of time. We are told to stay busy, to stay visible, to stay relevant. But rarely are we invited to stay still. The modern world has mastered speed. We can communicate instantly, stream anything, order everything. The Stoics, if they lived today, would not be surprised. They knew that human desire, left unchecked, becomes bottomless. That without limits, we are easily pulled by what others value. That the true challenge is not external noise, but internal confusion. The call to live simply is not a retreat from the modern world, but a return to self-awareness within it. It is a quiet rebellion against the belief that more is always better. One practice that bridges the ancient and the modern is journaling. Another timeless practice is voluntary discomfort. In an age built around comfort, the idea may seem strange. Why choose discomfort when comfort is so readily available? Technology, for all its brilliance, is not neutral. It shapes our attention, it conditions our habits, and it often encourages quantity over quality. The effects of overstimulation, not philosophical alone, they are biological. In response, we can cultivate practices that slow us down. And there are those today who have chosen to live with less. These are not escapes, they are returns. And what matters is often very small: a morning without emails, a warm cup of tea. We can begin gently. We do not need to abandon everything to live more simply. We need only to ask better questions. The good life, in Stoicism, is not an ascetic life, but a deliberate one. We live in an age of opportunity, but also of confusion. And in that corner, we may rediscover something we had almost forgotten, that being alive is enough. If your life could only hold 10 things, 10 objects, habits, thoughts, or rituals, what would you keep? It's not an easy question, but it is a revealing one. In asking it, we come face to face with our values, our fears, our attachments. We might find ourselves surprised not by what we choose to keep, but by what we realize we no longer need. Often, it is not that our lives are missing something, but that they are too full of things that do not belong. We began this reflection with two people, one surrounded by comfort yet restless, the other surrounded by silence yet whole. Not to add more to what has been said, but to let it settle. To let it echo gently through the rooms of our daily living. The Stoic path was never about ideas alone, it was always about practice. About daily effort, about small, repeated choices. To pause before reacting, to observe without grasping. To simplify not for appearance, but for inner order. Their difference was not in circumstance, but in orientation. When we are no longer pulled by every opinion, or possessed by every desire, we begin to show up differently for others, for ourselves, for the world. To find that the space we once filled with noise can become a place of clarity. To trust that the silence is not a void, but a source. We listen better, we speak more carefully, we give from a place of fullness, not obligation. And we are not so easily shaken, in the small acts of care that make up a day. These are not extraordinary things, but neither were the teachings of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. They were simple reminders, offered again and again, because the mind forgets and the world distracts. To feel, to err, to begin again, the good life, to them, was not a possession or a destination. It was a discipline, a relationship with the present moment. But what if happiness is not ahead of us, but already here, obscured only by layers of distraction and expectation? What if peace is not something to achieve, but something to return to? Not something to earn, but something to allow, a willingness to return, again and again, to the essentials. The unspoken belief that to slow down is to fall behind. The breath, the body, the warmth of sunlight, the companionship of those we love, the work of our hands, the calm of enough. We saw how these conditions exhaust the mind and crowd the heart. What can I release so that I might live more deeply? These questions do not come with easy answers, but they come with honesty. And that honesty, practiced daily, becomes a kind of compass. It does not point north or south, it points inward. We saw that even in abundance, there can be emptiness. In deciding, deliberately, that something once important no longer serves. This is not failure, it is evolution. It is the wisdom of pruning a tree not to diminish it, but to allow it to grow in the direction of light. And we asked, gently, whether more was truly what we needed or whether less, chosen with care, could offer more depth than all our distractions combined. One was outward focused, always reaching. The other was inward rooted, quietly still. This contrast is not meant to judge, but to reveal. A society that has mastered productivity but struggles with presence. We saw how Stoic practices, journaling, voluntary discomfort, mindful reduction remain more relevant than ever. We met modern lives choosing simplicity not as sacrifice, but as liberation. We recognize that our minds, too, require space. That clarity cannot survive in a cluttered life. That the good life, one that is calm, present, and meaningful, begins not in addition, but in subtraction. Not in the constant reaching for more, but in the gentle question, what is enough? We explored the pressures of the modern world, the relentless pace, the overload of information. We traveled back to the roots of this wisdom. We met Marcus Aurelius, writing his private meditations on clarity in the midst of war. We walked beside Epictetus, who found freedom not in ownership, but in control of thought. And we listened to Seneca, who lived among luxury yet longed for detachment. Each of these men, in their own way, reminded us, peace is not about what we have, but how we relate to what we have. Freedom is not found in wealth, but in self-mastery. We stepped into our own time, a world shaped by dopamine loops and digital distractions, and now we arrive at reflection. The Stoics asked us to live according to nature. That meant not only honoring the external cycles of the world, but the inner nature of what it means to be human. And the essentials are few: a steady mind, a clear heart, a quiet joy in simple things. We often search for happiness as if it lies somewhere ahead, one goal away, one purchase away, one version of ourselves away. There is great power in choosing what to let go. Imagine waking each day not to a to-do list, but to a question: what is essential? What matters today? Truly, the Stoic life is not a life of isolation. It is a life of connection, but that connection begins inside. To need very little is not to be empty, it is to be whole. And when we find that still point inside us, we begin to notice it in others. In the smile of a stranger, in the rhythm of rain. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.